We've got Revenant on the table. This is the latest game from Mind Clash, and I'm going to say it, this might be a Mind Clash game that won't completely melt my brain.
Yeah, this one is definitely more in the medium level, especially when you compare it to its cousin game, Voidfall, which came out last year. Revenant is set in the same universe,
yes,
although it is a very different game as far as what you're doing mechanically. Thematically, a lot of it does carry over. In Voidfall, all of these Voidborn ships started coming out of these rifts and attacking these planets, and your job is to fight back against them in a 4X style game. This game zooms in the action to one specific ship and its supporting fleet, and that is...
What's the name of the ship?
That is the Revenant. That is
Revenant.
the world ship, or colony ship, however you want to call it. And your goal is to escape the Voidborn. That sounds kind of familiar. It does feel a little bit like Battlestar Galactica for those who have played that game, but this is a purely competitive game. Even though you are kind of working together to mitigate the threat of the Voidborn, you are ultimately trying to be the one that scores the most points by doing the best job in the game and by supporting the houses that have the most power on the board, which is something we'll talk about. But don't get me wrong. It really doesn't, no part of this feels cooperative.
No.
Even though you are, because even as you are protecting the fleet, as you are protecting the Revenant, you are protecting your assets while also trying to expose the houses that your opponents are allying with. So you have this very much a back and forth in the game of like, who's going up which tracks. You want those houses to maybe fail while you want others to succeed. So yeah, it's always going to be a game where things are going downhill. You're just trying to make sure it goes downhill for other players faster than you.
Yeah, we'll expand upon what Ryan just said by showing you what here is on the table. We've got the main board. We've got this board over here, which is going to track sort of your influence with all of the different factions. This is going to keep track of a few things, but mainly it's going to tell you very well, might I add, the structure of the game flow and everything. But right here, we have sort of that big ship, the Revenant, with all these other ships. Imagine any science fiction movie you've ever seen with a bunch of ships where they're about to jump into hyperspace and go to their next location. That is literally what's happening in this game. You're trying to clean up your current location as best as possible before you jump, and then jump. Because you want to jump because ultimately, by the end of the game, if you jump in that last round, you're going to be able to colonize. You'll get to where you're trying to get.
Yeah.
But all these ships from the Void are coming out and making that quite a bit more difficult.
Yeah, and we have set up a game in the middle of progress. So this is after one full round. So this is what the board looks like in a 2-player game after one full round. Now, as you're seeing the board and as you're seeing the components, just know this is a prototype in very flux. In fact, it's in so much flux that they actually reached out to us and said, we know there's some UI issues we're still cleaning up. There's some graphic design. There's even some rules that they're still working on. So anything we say in this video, if it's not final, that's why.
Take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
But I mean, for the
core of the game.
For the most part, though, we'll be able to give you an idea and understanding of the core of what's going on in this game. And the one thing we haven't said is that it's largely a worker placement game. All of these different ships out here, and we've got a number of them. We've got arc ships, we've got fighters, we've got drop ships, we've got the Revenant. We've even got our own little frigates in our own color. You're going to be taking one of your 2 cadets or your captain and placing them out in one of those. So for instance, I could go to this fighter right here and use this fighter on my turn. The fighter's going to do a specific thing. The worker placement spots are more like the Revenant and the arc ships. When you go to an arc ship, you can use one of the 2 actions on there. There's planets out here. You can use the drop ships or your frigates to go to those planets. And then, of course, the fighters or your frigates can also be used to take out some of these void ships.
Yeah, a lot of the game is mitigation. David mentioned a key thing earlier when we're talking about this jump, this warp jump that you can do. And you can trigger that in the game, and you have to spend a lot of resources. You can go to the Revenant, trigger an action that's going to let you jump forward. And if you see over here, there are 2 of these cards. These are basically sonar cards, they call them, but they're paths. They're where you're going to end up. What is the situation going to look like? So if you are lucky enough to be able to go there, spend the resources, trigger that hyper jump, you get to choose what the setup is kind of going to look like. If you do not jump, however, which it can be hard to do.
We didn't.
And if you don't, you start to get into a situation like this where more and more Voidborn keep coming out of the rifts. So it's definitely a game about not just mitigating, but also trying to build up to those jumps and choosing when to jump. However, there's so much that goes into what you're deciding to do on your turn. Because like David said, a lot of the actions of some of these smaller things, you can go to the planets, you can fight the other creature, the Voidborn ships, whatever. You can go to the Revenant. All of that's great for helping you kind of clear what's going on around you, but you're also motivated by the cards that you're playing. And there are a number of these different cards that you can gain over the course of the game. Some of these are going to improve your crew so that when you go out and take actions, you get a better version of the action. Some are going to improve your frigate so you get a better version of your frigate. But all of these things that you're doing, even the jump, a lot of it costs resources. And so you're kind of weighing the needs of the Revenant versus your need to get out there and get resources from places. That's a big key decision.
For sure. You're going to be collecting resources from a number of the different locations, particularly going to some of these planets with dropships. All of this is built around this structure of the game. You're going to go through 4 different rounds, and each round is split up into these different phases, which are very nicely graphically represented here. You'll see this first phase. You skip the actual first phase in the first round, but this phase is where you take all your actions. It connects up to here, and you just do all of these things. This represents placing those characters, a lot of the things that we just discussed. Then after everyone's done that, you're moving on to the next phase. You go through this, and it effectively, very nicely and cleanly, for a game that looks this complicated, it very cleanly walks you through step by step everything you have to do.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of shows you what you need to be aware of and what you need to be prepared for. Because if you'll notice here, yeah, we do our actions, then we do a little refresh phase, but then all of the Voidborn that are out on the board get to attack. And this is another really key part in the game.
Yeah.
As you take actions, another deciding factor based on the actions you're taking during this phase is this step right here, which is gaining influence with these different houses that are out on the board. Each of these arc ships and the freighters and even some of these little civilian ships that can come out are all tied into these different factions. The more ships they have out on the board, the higher their power, the higher you're up on that track, the more points you're going to get. So you want to take actions for specific houses because you want to climb up those tracks and have them be the most power. But this is, I think, a really key thing. When the Voidborn attack, damage is mitigated by the player that's in that zone or the next closest player.
Yeah.
So if there's a sector that has a lot of ships that you're wanting to protect, you want to make sure that you're the one in that space, that you're controlling the Voidborn in that sector so that you can make sure the damage is assigned where you want it to go. Conversely, your opponents can just sneak into those sectors and then make sure that the house that you're highest with, they can assign the damage to those house ships first and plummet. They can drop from 3 down to 0 in one Voidborn phase if there's a little bit of collusion amongst the players. I think that's where the game really semi-competitive because you are trying to protect the Revenant, but also that can be very mean.
Yeah, you definitely want to protect the ships with which you have the most influence and try to destroy the other ones. For example, these 3 ships are going to divvy up 3 damage. Now, I could potentially be the one because I'm here, but if I was over here, Ryan is going to be the one that controls it because he's closer to it.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting case. There is just one ship, so it's going to be taking all the damage, but if it was in this and there's multiple ships, Ryan might want to take out this yellow one instead of this one if I'm higher on the yellow track and he's higher on this one.
Yeah, and also it's a huge part of the game because as these ships get destroyed, not only is that faction losing power, you're losing access to actions. If the fighters get destroyed, your ability to fight back against the Voidborn is less. If the dropships get destroyed, you can't really explore the planets anymore. And if the arc ships, these big ships get destroyed, you're literally losing entire actions from the game. Now, ships can be purchased back. There's certain actions and places you can go. Some of the planets give you an action to redeploy these ships back out. And again, that is another strategic decision because as you're bringing these ships out, you're increasing the power of that house. So if there's a juicy action that was eliminated and you really want to bring that arc ship back, it might be giving a power to a house that other players are beating you in. And so there are so many different levers that you're looking at as you're making these decisions in the game.
Yeah, and one other thing that you have to kind of weigh on your mind as you're making all those decisions is there's something called corruption out all over the board. It's going to be signified by these little markers on the backs of some ships. At the beginning of the game, some of the ships start with that, but throughout all the different phases, corruption will be added here and there. And when you go to a ship that has corruption, you take corruption. Yeah. And even on your player board, there's areas where you have these bonus actions. At the end of your turn, after you place and take the main action, you can actually take one of these bonus actions. But if there's corruption above it, you can't take that action. On top of that, you'll see here, this is also tied to where we collect our resources. I can't hold resources in this area where I have corruption. So as you take more and more corruption, you're going to very much limit what you can do with your bonus actions and even how many resources you can hold. Now, there is actions to take to remove corruption, and there's a benefit to that. Whenever you remove corruption from the board or your player board, you're going to put this on this void residue card. Once you have 3, it gives you a thing. There's these hidden influence cards. So in addition to going up the influence tracks, there's going to be a number of things throughout the game. This is one of them that allows you to take a hidden influence card. This gives me this influence here. I haven't shown Ryan what it is. But at the end of the game, the points you score from this board are going to be based on the power, plus your total influence, which is where you are on that track, plus these cards.
So let's talk about the actions just briefly, because there are so many different actions. We're not going to go through every action, but a lot of the actions are about gaining resources. There's a lot of spaces you could go to get resources, and then using those resources. Some of these actions allow you to convert them. Some of these actions allow you to fight back against the Voidborn. Some of them allow you to deal with that corruption like David mentioned. Some of them repair so you can take the damage off of ships. Some of them interact with these cards. They allow you to draw more improvement cards or play more improvement cards out in front of you. And as you play these cards, your boards become more and more asymmetric. Now, they do start off slightly asymmetric at the beginning of the game. You are given a role, like for example, my captain is a scientist, and that comes with a few things. It comes with 2 hidden objectives. These are some point cards that can get you up to 18 points per card if you do some very specific things over the course of the game. But it also gives you some starting abilities and then some abilities you can gain as you level up your captain. So you are starting from a little bit of an asymmetric point, but as you level up your captain, as you play those equipment cards to your frigate, and as you play these training cards down to your crew, you're becoming more and more and more asymmetric, getting more abilities and more access to things that will really change the game.
Yeah, and even that slight asymmetry at the beginning is significantly different across both players. The powers themselves may not be as rich as what your board ends up being. But for instance, he's a scientist that gives him a few benefits like an extra resource when he goes to certain locations. Mine too is giving me an extra resource. It improves my movement, but it's when I'm landing on planets. I'm the scout, so I want to go on planets as much as possible. And then I have another ability here that if I use this ability that sort of triggers it, the more planets I'm on, the moment I use it, the better for me.
Yeah, and playing into the powers of your captain, of your little crew board over here is huge. And again, a big part of the game is utilizing these cards. And these cards are slightly multi-use. You can, some actions require you to pay by discarding these cards. There's something like removing corruption requires you to discard these cards. But for the most part, you're going to want to get them out on your board to kind of feed into these combos. Like if you're going heavy combat, you can get some equipment cards that let you take out 2 or 3 different ships in one action instead of just 1. Or maybe it lets you move farther. Or when you drop on a planet, maybe you get some extra bonuses. So based on the cards that you're given and what your situation looks like, you are kind of benefiting yourself to go into a certain strategy. Of course, that strategy is also changed again by these different actions that are out on the board and which houses you're trying to gain power with, because there might be like some of these houses have combat actions. And so if you're doing heavy combat, you're wanting to maybe go up that track a little bit farther too. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's so many different things that influence the decision. And I think that's what gives it that iconic Mind Clash twist, even though the game, like explaining the game is not the hardest, but you do have a lot of options on your turn.
Yeah, overall, you really want to be focused on this influence board. There are points to be scored elsewhere. Like we said, those hidden objectives can score some pretty significant points. This is the core to it, though. So all the things that you want to be doing should serve your purposes there. Now, you can sort of coattail with other people. You're both up a track. Yeah. So you're both have an incentive to sort of protect those ships, keep the power up, things like that. So there is going to be a lot of that, particularly like in a 4-player game. There's obviously going to be some people benefiting from some of those factions having the most power possible. The other thing that's going to be sort of distracting a player like me is, like Ryan said, those cards. Because you're going to look at these cards and go, oh, that'll be fun. Like I have autocannons, which was an equipment card. So all the equipment cards go here. The training cards are going to go under your cadet. But this autocannons, during my main action, if I move my frigate, it's going to, where it ends, destroy one of the void ships in there for free. So like you can do some things on your board if you're not necessarily often taking sort of the actions to take out ships. You might have a card like this that helps you just take them out for free when you're doing potentially other things.
Yeah, now I will talk a little bit briefly about that cooperative aspect, because there is a benefit to everybody in saving the Revenant, because the Revenant can take damage like everything else. Any damage in a sector that can't be dealt, so if everything else is dealt full damage, all the remaining damage passes over to the Revenant and fills up these slots. There's a stack of damage tokens over here, and we have them kind of in a stack, but you'll be able to kind of see what's coming in a full game. But if the Revenant is ever damaged or destroyed, it's not ever removed from the board, but you have to take the tile and then resolve it. So in this case, all players are going to lose 3 energy. So if you have a couple players that have a pretty big energy supply, you kind of want to look across the table and say, we really can't let the Revenant be destroyed right now. Let me spend my energy first before it's destroyed. And then you'll be revealing more of these throughout the game. So there is a benefit to everybody, but it might be such that you're looking at that and saying, well, I don't care if the Revenant gets damaged right now.
Yeah, like everyone else is going to lose 3 energy. I don't have any energy, so
right.
I'm good.
Right.
So,
in fact, you might be encouraged to let it take damage, you know?
Right. It doesn't seem like the right thing to do.
The right thing. You
know
know what?
Yeah, it does feel almost a little cooperative at times. I'm guessing, and we've only played this at 2, but my guess is at 4 players, there's going to be potentially a little cooperation amongst some of the players at the table, not necessarily all of the players. Because if someone's doing well, 2 players might go, oh yeah, let's do this. Take out, I might say to someone else, oh, take out that ship when you're assigning your damage over there, because that's Ryan and he's way up on high on that track.
Right, yeah, and that ship can take 3 damage, the 4th damage blows it up. They can all take different amounts of damage. That is a really core part of the game, going up those tracks. The other core part of the game, the one thing I want to mention that is really important is that hyperspace jump, and being the one that chooses that hyperspace jump, because you're deciding how many ships are coming out, you're deciding the arrangement of where these different planets are going to be, and the very last round, as you progress through all these different rounds, when you get to the end, the final hyperspace jump is to a colony, and that's the ultimate thematic goal, is escaping to a colony. And there will be 2 of these colony cards out all game, like, you can kind of see what they're going to be. And when you get to the end of the game, whoever does the last hyperspace jump gets to choose which colony you go to. And that's actually going to increase the house's power that's labeled on that card by 1 more. So having that last touch, having that ability to like bump it up, it's a way to even get it above the normal max. So that could be really key, being the last one to do that hyperspace jump.
For sure. And it's not just the last round that is important. Like we said earlier, and I want to stress it again, if you don't jump, then you don't do this whole section down here, but instead you're going to roll a die and randomly add quantities of more of these void ships out to the board, and it puts you in a very bad situation. Because effectively when you jump, if you're able to jump every round, you're effectively getting to a new board that almost feels like a fresh game start state with fewer void ships, so you kind of have things a little bit managed. Obviously, what we did here, we didn't do that, and it feels quite overwhelming right now with all of these enemy ships.
Yeah, and there's a big part too. Enemy ships are going to spawn wherever these rift tokens are, if there's at least one in there. So if you can't manage to clear them all out, and you know the rift is going to spawn, you really, really want to consider using your action to jump. Like that. Once all these ships get destroyed, you're going to be in a really tight spot as players. So you're doing that for a couple different rounds. There's 4 total rounds in the game, and then you're scoring. And like David said, don't underestimate. This is where you're going to get a huge chunk of your scoring. Every single one of these is going to score, and you're going to get your value times the power at the top. That's significant. Everything else you're getting points for, even these hidden agendas, aren't going to give you a ton of points. Some of your equipment give you points. Leveling up your captain gives you points. Some of your resources give you points. You're going to lose points for corruption. So you are paying attention to all these different things, but this is definitely, if you're teaching the game, this is the core. This is significant.
When it comes to scoring, that's number 1. I would say number 2 might be the hidden agendas if you're able to pull them off. You can get, what,
36 points.
36. Yep. If you're able to do all 3 on both cards, you're able to do that.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out that's important that has nothing to do with scoring is this turn order track. It's called a tactics track.
Yeah.
And there's various things you're going to be doing in the game. For instance, like when you destroy enemy ships and stuff, like you get to go up on the tactics. There's a couple spaces here that just let you go up 3 on the tactics.
And some of these bonus actions let you go up and stuff.
As you do that, you're going to be able to get bonuses on the way up. And if you get high enough, when it resets at the end of the round, you go back down and you get some bonuses on the way back down. Not only that, it does determine, or at least whoever is in first place there, determine whether they want to be first player or not. So it's a turn order track as well.
And this only resets if you jump. So if you don't jump, So that's another thing too, is like if you're low on this, maybe you want to wait till you're in the 11 or 12 to jump and then whatever. But yeah, whoever's highest here gets to control the ships if there's a tie. So being high in the tactics order means maybe you get to make some of the decisions here. And also you get to decide who's going to be first player. And it's not as simple as saying, well, of course it's going to be me. It might be you if there's a juicy planet out there that you want to explore, or, you know, there's an action that you want to be guaranteed to take. But going last and being able to see what all the other players do over here and then kind of making your decisions after the fact can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, it was pretty significant. In our first round of this game that we set up here, I was behind Ryan on that track, and I was over here. So when he was determining what happened here, we were both the same distance away from it. He broke the tie. Same with this one. He broke the tie. And then, of course, he's closer to these.
Sure.
So he was deciding how the damage was divvied up on literally all of those sections.
And this is where you're looking. You're saying, where's my opponent ahead of me? I want to make sure those ships get destroyed first.
Yeah, and he did a good job of that.
So yeah, there's a lot going on, but I think David was key on the mark. This board right here, when you first look at it, it's just full of icons. But once you take a minute to parse it, it makes the entire rest of the game so much easier because you really are just like, okay, doing this step, you follow the arrow. We're doing all of this for the Voidborn. Okay, it's a lot of steps, but it's done in a very specific way that makes a lot of sense to you.
If you imagine that as, like Ryan said, it does look overwhelming at first, but if you look at that and think to yourself, okay, they've just taken what effectively is the player aid and turned it into a board. So it actually makes it a more living, organic part of the game experience as opposed to just having a card next to you. And I think it does really go a long way to help you walk your way through it. Once you understand the icons, you're like, okay, all we have to do is follow the steps.
Yeah, it's very well illustrated. Like the fact that whenever you come down to one of the hyperspace, it shows you, okay, if this token is flipped, meaning somebody triggered it,
do it.
Do it. Otherwise, don't do it and just move on to the next step. Like that's really smart, the way that they've designed this. And of course, all your in-game scoring is on here. All of the different tracks here, what you can do with some of the ships is all printed there. So it really, you're right. This is like a giant-sized player aid,
exactly.
For sure.
But that is Revenant. If you have any questions about it, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and talk to you as much as you'd like to about the game. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.